What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. My name's Dustin, and I like to talk about boats, bow fishing, shooting a bow, building all kinds of stuff with my hands, and whatever comes out of this crazy brain I've got. And I wanted to include you in this conversation that I've been trying to explain to people online for the better part of a decade. Today we're talking about float pods, performance pods, sponses, whatever the hell you want to call them. Whether you have had good experiences or bad experiences, we're going to talk about that today. So, not only stick around for the entire 20-minute video explaining float pods, but I want you to drop down and get in the discussion in the comments on this video, because everybody has their own opinion and own experiences, and we need to discuss that openly so we can grow from that, because not everybody is like me where they've had 4 or 5 sets and they've built 4 or 5 sets and they understand them. So hopefully at the end of the video you'll be able to understand them. Not only that, we're going to add a special 5-minute section to retrain that old brain of yours and bring back some high school geometry. Yes, math. You will have to do math to figure out the exact displacement and give you the formulas to be able to figure out buoyancy. That's physics. Stick around. This is going to be a long episode. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be an awesome topic, but I'm probably going to step on a few toes. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm glad to have you. Because right there sits a bass fisherman that likes aluminum boats. You're a cat fisherman, okay? You have your own needs. You are a bow fisherman. You have your own needs. And that guy over there, he runs a jet outboard, so he has his own needs, all right? None of you are going to run the same pod on the same boat and expect the same results, because all of you are going to have different weight characteristics to your boat. You drive your boat completely different than this guy versus this guy, and like these things are like snowflakes. One of the biggest problems that I see is that there is an industry of float pods. Well, the problem with that is not all transoms are exactly the same. For the most part, the industry standard transom angle is somewhere between 16 and 18 degrees. But they're not all the same. A typical pod that is sold through Beaver Tail or what have you, if you know somebody else, that's fine. They're made for that angle. But if you're off just like a little bit of an angle, then now all of a sudden you've got this triangle down here. Before we get into that part, there is, you know, I've got to emphasize the fact that every single one of you are going to want different things from performance pods, okay? Performance means something different to every single one of you. And honestly, if you don't need float pods, if you just bass fish, okay, then you don't need float pods, all right? If they come on your boat and you thought they were cool, or maybe you duck hunt and you thought that, well, that would really help me get in and out of the boat, I think I'll buy that boat. Okay, I get it. I understand. Here's what you need to know about float pods. They are made to displace water. They are made to make this hull act like a bigger boat. So, any pods, any set of pods, okay, will displace anywhere from like 150 pounds on the low end up to 300 pounds on the big end, depending on how big your boat is, depending on how big the pod is, all right? Obviously, you can't put a big pod on a little boat. Follow? So, me being a bow fisherman, and some of you cat fishermen out there who want to take cattle troughs and fill it full of water to keep your catfish alive. Okay, I get that. You're actually trying to move a heavy load. You're going to set your boat up so the back of the boat here has all of the weight. The fuel tank, the batteries, whatever storage that you typically run is going to be back here in the back, as well as a large outboard. Now, if you're running something over 150 horse, then chances are you're hanging 400 to 500 pounds on the back of one of these things. So pods are meant to offset that load. And the reason we need to offset that load is to keep the boat sitting level as possible. Not only for fishing standpoint, like to the bow fishermen out there who actually want their boat to sit as level as possible when it's in the water. All right. I've got another box over here I've been kind of using as a boat. So a bow fisherman will put all his weight back there in the back, right? This is a running angle. When we get ready to go fish, everybody grabs their bow and they go up to the front of the boat. Though the ideal situation at that point is the bottom of the boat is sitting as level as possible. Because it doesn't matter if you're running a kicker, you're running a troller, or you're pushing a fan. If that's not sitting level, then you're not getting in as shallow water as you possibly could, right? Okay, pods help that. They also help that if you have a boat that is set up with all that weight in the back, when you are running and you come up off pad, that wake that comes and hits the back of the boat, if you've got pods that just change that just a least little bit, that wave will actually push the boat instead of climb that transom that least little bit and swamp the back of the boat. So in some scenarios, lots of scenarios, pods are actually safer on your boat. Now, let's talk about how they're not safer. This is where I'm going to upset some people. So let's turn this. This is my transom, if you haven't figured it out. We made like 16 degrees, okay? So let's talk about water for just a second. So I drew a couple lines on here, right? Imagine water as suction on the back of the boat. Now on both sides, there is suction, okay? Water's coming around back here, and it's actually coming from underneath and coming up. So that's what's known as rear drag, okay? But since your prop is mounted back here and your rudder's mounted back here, then that makes everything real easy to turn, all right? Versus once we put pods on the back, and for us guys who are carrying a heavy load, we're going to go flush to the bottom and flush to the side. Now, forgive me, this is a flat-sided box, but you get the idea, all right? Use your imagination. So that actually takes your prop and your motor from here with all this suction coming around it and actually heading right towards that rudder. It actually moves that prop up there. Now you're trying to steer from the center, and all that water isn't turning here anymore. It's running right down the back, and that water that's actually coming around the back of the pod is back here in the back. So it makes that harder to steer, and they don't quite steer as well. That's one of the biggest things that people say they hate pods is because, they don't steer with a shit. Well, yeah, they steer completely differently. You're the one who can't steer with a shit because you didn't compensate for owning a boat with pods. But let me tell you how to counteract that, all right? Let's say you're the outboard jet guy, all right? You want that boat to, when it comes off, okay, another good aspect of pods here, without pods, the nose comes up, and once that water line comes back, then that weight distributes and you're up on pad, right? Typical how you get off in pad. But now you've got pods on the back here, right? So now instead of pitching up like this, now the boat only pitches up just at least a little bit. And once that water line comes back, then it drops at least a little bit and you're on pad again. That's a benefit of pods. So once you get up on pad, let's say upwards of 30 mile an hour, all right, that steering becomes less and less because you have all of this, 2 inches or so of boat still in the water back here, but it's not in the water back there. Now, literally, you have as much boat behind the prop as you do in front of the prop, and like you can't steer it, okay? So you need to slow down, get more of the front of that boat in the water, or you can actually trim down to bring the front of the boat stuck to the water, all right? And get some of that steering back, all right? Another way to do that is to introduce air off the back of the transom. And how we're going to do that, turn our boat back a little bit, okay, is offset this. So, most back of your boat, okay, is going to, or the side of your boat is going to be angled like this. So, if you put your pod on, and instead of it being matching to the side, it actually is square, then now that suction that's coming around, it is still hindered at least a little bit, but that water's coming off back here, and it may be hitting down here low, but it's not hitting high up here anymore. And so this pod will actually turn a little bit better. So let's go back to this. So this little gap here will actually help you turn a little bit. At all speeds, actually. So other pod manufacturers will tell you that you can rise them up from the bottom. You can. It's perfectly fine. As I talk about this offsetting and rising up, every one of these is taking away from the displacement, all right? So like this was a set location, okay? Here, this is space for our outboard, okay? We can't just move it over, all right? We have to have this space to be able to maneuver our outboard. So let's say we took 2 inches off here, okay? And we took an inch off here. Well, that's a lot of displacement on a pod that was only, say, 1.5 cubic feet to begin with, right? So as big as possible, as small as necessary, all right? And that necessary is based on your steering needs, all right? So you've seen production hulls that have a step on the bottom of it. From the bottom of the boat, there's like an inch step and a gap. Well, once again, that's like this air gap that we've talked about right here. Once your boat gets up on pad, let's say above 25 mile an hour, it will actually introduce air from the side or from the bottom here in this little step, and instead of water running down the full length of the pod and then actually coming up, your boat is actually up enough to where it breaks that right there, and the water is not stuck to the bottom of the pod, keeping it stuck to the water. This little bit will help you steer now at speeds on the water. Okay, so above 25, above 30 mile an hour, this little inch and a quarter gap down here won't be touching the water anymore, and now you have that original hull design, and it's still going to turn the way it did before you put pods on. Make sense? Think about pods as rear drag when maneuvering, all right? Think about them as added displacement while sitting still. And that will greatly affect the design that you're going to go with on your boat. So let's talk for just a second about like tracker pods or Sea Arc pods or Crestliner pods, or for the most part, they are all pretty much the same. You know the ones I'm talking about, where both sides of them are tapered like this, and the bottom of them is only like this wide, and they're only about that long, and they got this nice little step. Those are called performance pods, and they perform the best on the showroom floor or out in front of Bass Pro Shops, and they're meant to attract the person who doesn't understand things that we've shared in this video. Do they displace water? Yes, they do. Probably together, the both of them probably only displace like, 1.5 cubic feet. All right. probably that 100, 125, maybe 150 pound displacement if they were completely submerged. When you design your pod, one of the first things I want you to do after you shut this video off is to go out and look at the water line on your boat. All right, turn back around here a little bit. So this would be our water line. All right, and you're going to add displacement back here, which is probably going to set your boat up in the water at least an inch, maybe two. All right, just sitting still, probably a couple inches, honestly. But it is based on how big a displacement you have. But one thing I want you to realize is that once you want to figure the volume of your pod and how much it's going to affect your hull, is you need to figure out how much it's going to displace. So on your water line, let's say the average boat is going to be sitting about 10 inches deep. Now, I'm not talking about where your boat's sitting when you're up there using the trolling motor, okay? I'm talking about how your boat's sitting when you're sitting in the captain's chair and you've got all that weight back there and that boat's sitting like this, all right? That's what I want to know. It's probably going to be somewhere between 12 and 10 inches, depending on how light your rig is. So, most pods that we're going to build are going to be between 10 and 12 inches tall. The idea is all of this pod is all displacement, all right? I want to be able to walk my happy camper ass all the way back here to the back of the transom and it not sink this pod completely. I want to be able to stand on the pod and relieve myself if I want to, okay? I mean, honestly, that's what I want. I don't want this pod to ever go completely under the water. But I want it to be right at the water, right at the very top of it. And the reason for that would mean that I'm getting all the capacity that I can possibly get out of the cubic inches that I've designed the pod to be, all right? That means that if this pod weighs 10 pounds, but the volume of it actually displaces 100 pounds, then that means I'm actually getting, 90 good pounds of displacement out of this pod. Now, let's say you're a jet boat guy and you run a 2060, but you want to put a 250 on it so you can actually put a jet foot on it and only get like 175 horsepower. Well, the problem with that is that 250 horsepower outboard weighs 500 pounds. Well, to displace that, you need a set of pods that will offset, let's say, 200 pounds. That way you'll be sitting relatively flat when you go to take off. The boat will still take off flat. And when you come off pad, that pod will actually grab that wave and push your boat instead of drop down and swamp the back of your boat. Lots and lots and lots of information in this video, boys, and I hope that you can appreciate the conversation. The thing that I did not touch on and I wanted to come back and revisit is angled pods. Now, the first set of pods that I made, I thought it would be sporty to actually angle a set of pods up in this manner. It's a big no-no. You do not want to do that. The reason for that is because the back of the boat, okay, if you have angled pods and you start to take off, it will lift the nose and it will suck the bottom of the boat down, all right, until you overpower it, and then the front of the boat will come down and all of a sudden, you've got that tail sticking up there. And that water going up it will suck the boat down again, and then all of a sudden you're porpoising, okay? So I believe Beavertail recommends that you are able to mount your pods like this, up like 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. That is fine. I totally agree with that. Flush, to me, is the best option, whether it be flush or flush raised an inch, okay? Either way will be fine. Do not tip your pods up the full length of the pod, more than 3/4 of an inch. If you tip it up like that, you will create porpoising issues and not be able to control your boat. All right. Well, boys and girls, you didn't think that you were going to bring back freshman geometry, did you? So, to go along with our pods and figuring displacement, knowing how to figure displacement on any given boat or any given modification will greatly affect the outcome of your project. So, I get asked all the time, how big a float pod should I put on my boat? Well, here is a little breakdown of how to figure out buoyancy and give you some sort of idea of how much your float pod can actually displace. So before we get started, you need to know that 1 cubic foot of space has the capacity to displace 64.2 pounds of buoyancy in water. Okay, and some just minor stuff. A cubic foot, which is 12 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches, is equal to 1,728 inches. Okay, cubic inches. So let's get started in on our problem here. Now, as you can see in this potential pod, our transom would be over here. All right, or over here. Okay. In this particular pod, we're going to have the angle of the transom and the angle of the back of the pod the same. Now, if your pods aren't going to be the same and they're going to be flat on the back, you need to go ahead and do your triangle measurements and figure the volume out for the pod that way. If you don't remember how to do the geometry on this, well, I thought I would help you. So basic volume is length times width times height. All right, but it gets a little complicated when we get into triangles. So since this pod is actually tapered for the side of our boat, you can see our potential pod is 20 inches long, the bottom of it is 16 inches wide, and the pod is 10 inches tall. Let's just go ahead and realize that since we're going to be actually 20 inches across up here at the top too, okay, that will give us 4 inches of taper on our side. All right, so that will make this little square that we've sectioned off here actually 10 inches tall, all right, 4 inches wide, and 20 inches long. So now that we have 2 cubes, we can go ahead and do the math on that. So we're going to do our big one to begin with. 20 by 20 by 10, length times width times height. All right, 20 times 20 times 10, that's 4,000 cubic inches. All right, but we're missing our triangle here, so we actually have to subtract from that. So let's figure out the volume of our box. All right, anytime you're figuring volume and you section off your triangles, it doesn't matter what the angles are, it doesn't matter any of that, as long as you can section them off and know what the measurements are. All right, then you can cut that measurement in half from the volume of your box and subtract it. So we're going to do the volume of our box next. So 20 inches long by 4 inches wide by 10 inches tall, and that will equal 800. Okay, that's the full box. So half of that would be 400. All right, so 400 from the 4,000, that will give us 3,600 cubic inches. But we have 2 of them. We have a port side pod and a starboard pod. That's 3,600. That's the measurement, the cubic inches measurement of our pod. All right, we've already done it. That's all there is to measuring the volume of that pod. So we're going to make 2 pods. Okay, times 2. That's 7,200 cubic inches total. We need to go ahead and divide that. Okay, with our formula over here. So by dividing the 7,200 here, we'll divide this by our 1728. That actually gives us 4.16. All right, that's our cubic foot. So FT to the third power. For both pods, 4.16 cubic feet. And then we take our cubic foot equivalent, all right, and figure out what our pounds are. So 64.2 times 4.16, that gives us 267 pounds of displacement for both pods, assuming that the water line is up to the top and the complete pod is submerged. They have the potential to displace 267 pounds. Okay, math class is over. Y'all can go home now, but before you do, don't forget to leave a comment below for extra credit, and we will join you on the next one. Now, if you see me in the shallows, well, your pods better be on correctly, son, because I'm going to send it till I bend it and get to them fish long before you are. Y'all be good. Shoot straight, shoot off, and don't forget to wear the PFDs. We'll see you on the next one.